Hi everybody. In the last lecture, I talked about globalization in the field of international political economy or global political economy. I explained you some major historical developments in the 20th century which led to the globally interconnected world, particularly in financial and economic terms. I also briefly discussed the meaning of the term globalization. But you should keep in mind that there is no one definition fits all concept. Globalization is also viewed in relation to climate related issues or cultural values. In fact, some define the very term globalization in its broad scope of covering several issues concerning the entire world. Similarly, I also explained you about the categorization of the field of IPE. IPE for some scholars is a major field in its own right, whereby IR is a subfield of the IPE. In the US, it is a subdiscipline of political science. At least scholars Lisa Martin and Jeffrey Frieden have put it that way. Uh, Scholars like Richard Cooper, Charles Kindleberger, Benjamin Cohen, Robert Gilpin are those who inducted IPE into IR. Similarly, in the UK, a big name in the IPE, Susan Strange, the author of Mad Money and also Casino Capitalism, saw both IPE and IR as subfields of broad program of international studies. So you see, this is what IR or IPE or international political economy is about. They are dynamic and open-ended study areas with several debates and new additions, all right? It should be noted, however, that scholars have worked hard to discover this reality and build up the body of knowledge. The body of knowledge, I mean, the knowledge about the relationship between politics and economics. It was interesting to hear what Professor Robert Cohen had to say about IPE. All right, he is currently at Princeton University. Cohen is a big name in IR, especially in the area of international institution or cooperation. And he said that when he talked about his ideas of showing politics in economic activities with his mentor, uh, she said he would be writing a book that would be written with big letters and a lot of spaces because she assumed there wouldn't be much content to write on the subject. Obviously, Kehen was very disappointed, and it was the same from economic side. This situation was characterized very well by Susan Strange. She observed that the gap between politics and economics was a case of mutual neglect for a long time. IR studies are no way confined to only war and peace or so-called high politics and only little economics or so-called low politics, which was the case definitely initially, but through fields like IPE, it has come to embrace areas such as economic geography, international business, micro and macroeconomics, international finance and banking, of course, and economic history. In the last lecture, I gave you an example of a book, Theories of IP, authored by Caporaso and Levine, professors of political science and economics, respectively, in order to show you how IR is an interdisciplinary field. There are, in fact, scholars who master multidisciplines, like the Nobel laureate Paul Krugman, currently the New York Times columnist. He is a liberal Keynesian economist. I will tell you later about Keynesian economics. He was a professor of economics and international affairs at Princeton University. Then there is Professor Jagadish Vagwari uh, in Columbia University. All right, he is professor of political science and economics there. He is a Keynesian economist specializing in trade policy. He is from the Indian diaspora, by the way. Uh, anyway, if it's of interest to some of you, another Nobel laureate economist, Amartya Sen from India, is a structuralist. All right, meaning he supports social democracy. And Sen and Bhagwati are seen as rivals in terms of India's economic policies. As Sen being the critic of BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or Prime Minister Narendra Modi's policies, and Bhagwati is seen as a guiding light of Modi government. If we compare this multidisciplinary practice with other parts of the world, for instance, in South Asia, public university usually have a very fixed curricula under a certain faculty. Last time I gave examples from Indian universities while explaining the state of the IR field. This time I'll take Nepal. A student of management faculty at the Tribhuvan University, the biggest public university in Nepal, cannot take any subjects of law or sociology or others, and vice versa, and credits cannot be added to his or her own degree. The system simply does not allow you or encourage you to do that. It's rather impractical given the infrastructure and services provided. It is only possible if you separately get admissions in different faculties. Therefore, an economist is only economist, or a political scientist is only a political scientist. In fact, in my experience, the term multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary is rather uncommon. Even within the academia, I have heard scholars saying, you see, you study everything in the US, all right? There is no such strictly separate subject areas like we do. All right, coming back to the separate treatment of these two spheres, economics and politics, scholars have for some time now understood and embraced the interrelationship between these two spheres. History shows many such events, and even contemporary events show policy changes that allude to the fact that the so-called free market is not totally free, and the high politics are shaped by market imperatives. The system of Bretton Woods, for instance. Bretton Woods is a town in New Hampshire in the US. There, a conference established a monetary system whereby nations had to link their currency with gold and also with the International Monetary Fund's IMF's discretion to maintain balance. However, in the 70s, President Nixon removed this gold convertibility of dollars to stop losing gold reserve when the US had some economic problems during the Vietnam War from 1961 till 1973. So the currency exchange system came back to the floating system, all right, while some remained with some sort of pegging, while others chose a floating system, not fixed system. The relationship between politics, or rather security concerns of a state, and the economic interests is not fixed. As Professor Michael Mastanduno um, showed in his article Economics and Security in Statecraft and Scholarship, uh, which was published in the highly reputed journal International Organization. This is a journal which was published in the past by the MIT Press, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and now by the Cambridge University Press. He showed that in the US, policymakers and scholars saw economics and politics in an integrated way between World War I and World War II. But in the Cold War years, he argued that scholars or politicians saw them separately. And in the post-Cold War, again, they emphasize the integration of the two. I also mentioned in the last episode that in the 1990s, European countries who were parts of the European monetary system, an arrangement to have a stable exchange rate of their currencies, became victims of currency speculation. Countries could not keep up their commitment to keep the value of their currencies within the given range, vis-a-vis Deutsche Mark or German Mark. Particularly after the unification of East and West Germany, owing to the changes in the national interest rates. So eventually Britain left the system, and France and Germany eventually had to come to a compromise. This system later evolved into the European Monetary Union, the Eurozone what we have right now, right? Similarly, in the financial crisis of 2008, the US government had to bail out its collapsed banks. Because of this particular crisis and the financial globalization, in the ensuing debt crisis in Europe, the European Commission of the European Union, with the IMF and the ECB, the European Central Bank, together had to intervene to save some Eurozone countries. Anyway, although the intervention of these international organizations and Europeans is institutional in nature, it is apparent that how heavily Germany has been involved in all this, which is the main driver of the European economy. And there is definitely the larger question of the future of the euro itself, or at least the possibility of the Greece's exit from the monetary union. You see, the crisis hit countries had to make changes in several of their national policies. Popularity of leftist parties has been on the rise in Europe, owing particularly to the austerity policies these countries had to bear. In recent elections, Greece's radical left anti-Euro party, Syriza, won and formed the government, and now the EU Troika, the EU together with IMF and ECB, is dealing with a finance minister who calls himself an erratic Marxist. You see, in Spain, the Podemos movement is apparently gaining a huge support from the unemployed and underemployed population. As you can see, theories that attribute full autonomy to each sphere separately do not explain the world events well, and there are so many other events or policy changes you can talk about all around the world, not only in the US and Europe. Anyway, a student or a professional of a non-political field might wonder that why this separateness is so exaggerated, while it is obvious that neither of them can be total freedom, or let's say in a vacuum. Your argument is reasonable, but one fundamental fact that has to be taken into account is that in the academic tradition, theorists emphasize one or some particular assumptions of their theories, not others. They followed a method of analysis specifica, meaning specific analysis. Many theorists strongly claim that theory should be parsimonious, meaning it has to be narrow but it has to be very powerful in its explanation. Then they try to position their theory in a way convincing enough to explain world events and statecraft. One example is economists of today, mostly called neoclassical economists, emphasize rational choice. They focus on individual. So this individual rational choice theory assumes that we humans are self-interested individuals. Therefore, in order to understand not only economics but also statecraft, all right, these economists argue that human interests have to be understood well first. However, There are several other factors also that affect human behavior and which this methodological approach does not explain. Similarly, there are scholars who emphasize military power when they explain statecraft, or loosely calling it for now realists. All right, they very convincingly explain US policies or Russia's policies, China's policies based on hard power or military power. Let's let's say the neo-realist professor John Mersheimer, University of Chicago. Don't worry about the theoretical terms neo-realist or realist. I will explain them in detail in theory lectures. All right, okay. That also some emphasize not only the U.S. Military power but also Hollywood power, meaning smart power, social power. Howard Professor Joseph Nye always argues about United States soft power. However, the problem with these approaches is there are still many things in the world which they cannot say anything about. Things are not always happening through power, especially in international forums where one country, one vote system is established, a system that prevents heavy handed decision making by big military powers. Small nations have successfully managed to uphold their agendas because the decision making is multilateral. That is, everyone has the same decision making. The GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, is a good example of multilateralism among other organizations. So you see, the theories narrowly focused or narrowly defined become weak. Because remember, they are narrow, all right, but they also like to remain that way. Some do propose to combine different assumptions to explain the world and the statecraft better. The approach, which in academic terms is known as theoretical eclecticism, and some in general call it muddling through or making a total mess. You see, both these theoretical sort of blindness and the combinations resemble the same ideological blindness or political pragmatism of politicians also or practitioners also. So it is not surprising at times some scholars call these theories like ideologies in international relations rather than calling theories. All right. So anyway, let's keep this discussion apart for now. We will have a separate lectures dedicated to theories. I will stop here now. In the next lecture, I will quickly get into theories and perspectives in economic liberalism, Marxism, neo-Marxism, mercantilism, or state-centric realism. All right. Thank you for listening.